Cyberpunk 2077 is a complicated thing to review. I don't even know if I should call these reviews. The current state the game is in now, while a massive improvement from the version we played on release day, is still deeply imperfect. After 3 patches, 37 days, and over 150 hours of my life spent trying to get Keanu Reeves to finally ask me to go to the ball with him, I can easily say this is one of the greatest games I have ever played. It is also near Metal Gear Solid 5 levels of unfinished. Initially, in the first few days, the honeymoon period, I loved Cyberpunk in a completely untainted and beautiful way. I felt like all I needed was to live in Night City and to ride my motorcycle about the blurry film grain-washed landscape. I no longer needed to conform to the real world, any kind of culture or societal hierarchy. Cyberpunk was my girlfriend. But like all things beautiful, this feeling faded over time, and the cracks began to show. That's not a metaphor. I mean, I literally found holes where you could see straight through the ground. The full crashes, while starting out being something that only happened once in 3 days of gameplay, became something that happened around every half hour at one point. In another instance, I jumped on top of this asshole and fell through the world. Also, there's water down here. But the gameplay is so much fun, the Far Cry-esque stealth mechanics, the combat, the staggering amount and variety of weapons, the climbing, the driving, and exploration. Ah, look at that. Isn't it just the most gorgeous— oh, come on! In Cyberpunk 2077, you create your own custom character, complete with which genitalia you would like to see waggling enthusiastically every time you change your pants. Regardless of your decisions, your character is named V. V, no matter how you play the game and no matter what life path you choose, will always be a mercenary. You will always befriend Jackie Wells, and you will always watch this sweet montage. It's at this point that all 3 possible openings of the game converge into our open-world, branching story. I put branching there in quotation marks because I'm being sarcastic, it's very linear. Although these openings, while very well done and very interesting to play the first time, have essentially no effect whatsoever on the rest of the game. Now you might find that excusable if they were large, significant chunks of playtime, but they're not. They're about 20 minutes tops. This lack of weight in the player's choices can be found throughout the rest of the game as well, most notably for me at the end of the prologue, where your relationship with Dexter Deshawn ends with the same bang no matter how the two of you interacted. There are certainly relationships you can expand upon or ruin, but I always found things to be more linear than I had initially expected. Speaking of relationships, on top of having an excellent sci-fi crime drama story, this game also has a lot of great characters. And while, like I just said, you can't really interact with them all that much, they're voice acted and designed so well I just didn't care most of the time. I also like how characters can call or text you out of the blue while you're venturing from one job to the next. Helps a lot with immersion. Unfortunately, no matter how interesting a character or their story is— oh my god, what is going on with her arms? Jesus Christ! In my opinion, the best character in the game, by leaps and bounds, is Johnny Silverhand. A rebellion-obsessed handsome Jack Ghost from Tales of the Borderlands type character who you can build a meaningful relationship with. I thought his overarching personal development and mostly outstanding dialogue were handled really well. I don't want to spoil whether or not you can trust him, but you can, he's my best friend. Though if you raised your glass to Jackie instead, I wouldn't blame you, he is also the perfect Choomba. It's hard to talk about Johnny without mentioning Samurai, his former band when he was still among the living. I had never heard of the real band behind the music, Refused, before, but they killed it. I thoroughly enjoyed a lot of their songs, Never Fade Away being my and Johnny's favorite. Music plays an enormous part in the game, both in setting the tone and in making you bob your head when a 10 out of 10 track comes on the radio, something that happens much more often than you would expect. And you'll have plenty of time to surf the channels while you drive around, being unable to switch the camera back to third person. Thanks, Bugs. Night City is a big place and its individual districts are so visually unique, interesting, and well designed, it would be a shame to not try and see as much of it as you can. And while you could traverse the city on foot, double jumping, sprinting, and climbing rooftop to rooftop, most of the time you'll be driving one of the game's many cars and motorcycles. I found the bikes to handle better myself, with the Erendite, ironically the most expensive car, feeling to me to be the worst. Driving overall is fine, but it really seems like you should be able to set them automobiles to autopilot. I mean, it happens in the story, you can call any vehicle you own to almost any location, but I can't kick back and watch the city go by unless I get someone else to drive, or I stand on top of a car. Do that, by the way, it's really fun. Back to my point, we need that Ubisoft AutoNav, and while we're at it, hacking traffic lights from Watch Dogs. There's no shame in stealing it. Are we going to pretend they didn't borrow quite a bit from The Witcher? Speaking of The Witcher, Cyberpunk is yet another IP that comes with a ton of lore and backstory for you to either look into, or if you're like me, for you to avoid until post-release. I didn't even know there was going to be swords in the game outside the Mantis blades we saw in the Keanu reveal trailer. Maybe it was my avoidance of trailers and hype material that led to my initial opinion of Cyberpunk being a bit off base. I didn't know what had been promised, so I didn't know where I'd been lied to. I was surprised when the game was released to see so many people ragging on it, and saying the PS4 version, the one I was enjoying so much, was unplayable. And while I still don't consider it personally unplayable, I can definitely see how your game crashing every 20 minutes, or your cell phone not working so you have to make an entire new game, would make a lot of players want their money back. Fortunately, I didn't have these experiences. All I saw was a very blurry, kinda bad-looking, unbelievable giant future city to love. It's gotten a lot better in that regard with patches, but it's still not the prettiest game in existence. Textures over NPCs still take far too long to pop in, which is where everyone's thumbnail of an N64-looking bouncer comes from. Rough. While the graphics on PS4 might not be all that in a bag of microchips, Night City itself is. This is a really impressive, ambitious, and enormous world to explore, both horizontally and vertically. The term dense doesn't even begin to cover it. There is perhaps slightly too much world here. There's so much to discover, skylines to take pictures of, people to cut the heads off of, unbelievably inappropriate and accurate depictions of future advertisements to be amused by. Wowzers. The many side quests you'll encounter on these far-reaching travels are in some cases Witcher 3 tier, and in others are decidedly not. Feels like they went with a quantity over quality approach, but that doesn't mean some still weren't brilliant, and in my opinion, even more emotionally effective than anything from Geralt's adventures.
Ha! That's it. Got no fucking idea what this is about. But if you don't go with them, I'm never talking to you again.
Know what objectively sucks though? BDs. God, I hated having to sit there watching a first-person video of a cyborg doing some shit I don't care about. The first scene with Smasher was cool, but outside that it was always a nightmare. I feel like we knew this kind of thing wasn't fun when it was in Arkham Knight 6 years ago. Why are we still doing it? You know I want to get back to the shooting and the slashing, even though the slashing isn't that great either. It's not bad. It feels satisfying to decapitate a foe, and I appreciate any game that gives me a katana, but I found that long-term I preferred to use guns. Shooting's not so bad. While I went with pistols most of the time, the sniper rifle was also a lot of fun. Compared to something like Destiny, maybe it's not so perfect, but for an RPG that isn't Borderlands and has this many weapons, it feels more than serviceable. The biggest difference between this and its contemporaries in terms of combat is probably the hacking mechanic, which is really just a list you scroll up and down on now I think about it, but I found the playthrough where I focused on this to be the most fun. Casting Thundaga on an army of corpo robots just felt like something everyone should get to experience at least once. Little moments like that add up a lot over time to... Oh, come on! In the world of Cyberpunk 2077, it's commonplace to modify oneself heavily with cybernetics. Some people going as far as to chrome all of their skin, and while you can't really do this at all, you can use these upgrades to increase specific stats, unlock unique abilities, or new body parts that can have a huge effect on gameplay. Nothing is the same after Double Jump. There's other cool stuff like Trigon-esque rocket arm and gorilla arms, which are so strong you can punch people to death on accident. Unfortunately, there are no drawbacks to modifying yourself this way, despite the lore implying a potential loss of humanity. It doesn't make you easier to hack or more vulnerable to EMPs. It kinda doesn't mean anything to be outside the bonuses they provide. Speaking of stuff not meaning anything, the only time any of your choices seem to have any effect on anything whatsoever is in the end. As a cohesive tale of the mercenary V and his travels with the ghost of Johnny Silverhand, I loved the story, even as linear as it is. I loved how it ended. Didn't love how short it is, but they really stuck the landing in my opinion. If you disagree, please play the incredibly specific to unlock Don't Fear the Reaper ending. I won't spoil the whole thing, but damn is it a time. Cyberpunk 2077 is, despite being one of the most flawed games I think I've ever played, also one of the best games I've ever played. I had a lot of fun, I fell in love with this world, and I'm genuinely going to miss it a little moving forward. I don't want to play anymore, because I went too far in the name of this review and played too much, but it was worth it. A game with more bugs I have not found, but life's been really tough, and I'm grateful to have had such an interesting, well-thought-out science fiction world to escape to for a few hours each day. The music is outstanding, the day-night cycle is long and luxurious, the voice acting is fantastic, and the skits during loading screens are so annoying it makes me want to tear my own face off. I could go on forever about things like how I found Little BB, all the cut content, the Blue Eyes conspiracy, and how he's tied to the Paralysis quest because he disappears when it ends. By the way, I made it over to him. See? And he's gone. I don't give numbers to games, but given the deeply flawed state the PS4 version is still in, I don't know if this would get a very high one. I don't want to make it sound like it wasn't also an amazing experience that I loved participating in. It's more complicated than that. I can simultaneously enjoy the things that are good about this game and dislike the things that are bad. Nuance exists, despite all of the internet trying to convince you otherwise. It's a game I'm not going to forget anytime soon, and in the future I intend to do more videos on other CD Pro- Oh, come on now, are you serious? it.